Okay, I want to talk about Scadrial's future because there is so much that we learn in Wind and Truth that I feel like will inform what happens on Scadrial. So I want to use all the information that we learned in the Stormlight Archive up until the end of Wind and Truth, the Sunlit Man, to talk about Scadrial after Mistborn Era 2, i.e. the end of the Lost Metal, concludes. So, as a reminder, like, the timelines intersect. Sorry, I'm just gonna put my mic here. As a reminder, the timelines intersect in my mind pretty clearly after the end of Wind and Truth, because Wind and Truth ends kind of right around the time that Mistborn Era 2 is kicking off. So, about a third of the way through Mistborn Era 2. And we know this because at the end of Wind and Truth, we see Wit relocate from Roshar to Scadrial, taking on the job of Wax's coachman in House Ladrian. So let's talk about what Scadrial's future holds, especially since Scadrial is becoming a bigger and bigger player in the Cosmere. And obviously this video is going to include spoilers for the Stormlight Archive up until the end of Wind and Truth, along with everything that happens through Mistborn on Scadrial. Oh man, okay. Scadrial has a tumultuous future ahead of it. I'm sure of it. First, number one, Scadrial is entering this new dawn of technology. And it's entering into the space age following the conclusion of the Lost Metal. Specifically, at the end of Lost Metal, Kelsier asks Harmony to lead Scadrial into what he calls a new technological age, to share the advances that people on Scadrial can achieve with electricity and industry in the way that he says autonomy does on Taldane. And I think Harmony is gonna accept this. We know from the hints in the Sunlit Man that there is a Scadrial space station on the planet Canical. So we know that Scadrial does advance into the space age. And so I think that is in part because of Harmony's influence. And it appears, frankly, that Scadrial is going to become the most advanced planet in the Cosmere, surpassing even Taldane that autonomy is influencing. In fact, during the events of Mistborn Era 2 and Lost Metal specifically, Scadrial was the second planet in the Cosmere to develop gunpowder weapons and electricity only after Taldane, autonomy's homeworld. And so even without Harmony's assistance at that period of time, Scadrial was advancing and catching up quickly to Taldane. And so I think it's possible that I honestly think that, to me, I read that scene as Harmony kind of implicitly accepting that if Harmony does end up listening to Kelsier and turbocharging technological growth on Scadrial to arm and prepare Scadrial for what it may face, we will see Scadrial become the most technologically advanced civilization in the Cosmere. And oh man, Scadrial needs all the technology it can get for what it's gonna face. Which leads me into point 2, which is, I think, what we're gonna see Scadrial face is collusion between autonomy and retribution. Just a reminder for all my Mistborn readers that the end of Wind and Truth concludes with the formation of retribution, i.e. the merger of odium and honor into retribution, into this unleashed retribution that is no longer bound to Roshar. And right when Taravangian picks up honor and becomes retribution, he thinks about his next steps for the Cosmere and acknowledges that 90% of Roshar is under his control and his next actions have to be decisive. And the decisive actions that he thinks about are ways to draw the attention of the other shards, his enemies, toward a conflict on Scadrial. So he's trying to redirect the attention of the shards away from him towards Scadrial. And I think to me, this development put everything that happened in Mistborn Era 2 in a completely different light. Because prior to that point, I'd been thinking of autonomy as an autonomous shard, where she's operating independently, and is like, her goal in operating independently is to stop kind of Scadrial's technological advancement. But with Retribution's calculus in mind of redirecting the other shards towards Scadrial, I think it's possible that Retribution or Taravangian is actually either manipulating or maybe even partnering with Autonomy into attacking Scadrial in order to draw the attention of those other shards away from Roshar. Or potentially in order to draw the attention of the other shards away from something else that Taravangian or Retribution is plotting. And so I think Autonomy's attack on Scadrial, even though it failed, could have just been a distraction to blind all of the other shards away from something else taking place in the background. In fact, what Moonlight says is that Autonomy is adept at misdirection, at false leads, and confusing shadows of half-truths. And so is Taravangian, as we know from the Stormlight Archive, is adept at misdirection, false leads, and half-truths. And so this partnership between them, I think, if it is taking place between two of the most crafty shards or people in the Cosmere, is incredibly concerning. And what it means is that we should freaking hope that Harmony is able to get it together and build alliances with the other shards to face potentially Autonomy and Retribution combined. Which gets to point number 3, which is, speaking of Harmony, things are not looking good for Scadrial regarding Harmony, because he could turn pretty, evil or discordant. While a lot seems to rest in Harmony, as I just talked about, the ending of Lost Metal seems to suggest that the ruin part of Harmony will eventually lead out or exceed kind of the preservation part. In fact, Kelsier notices what he describes as the quote-unquote darkness within Harmony or Sazed, which is a different phrase from the one that he showed. The powers, Kelsier notices this, he says the powers were in imbalance. Ruin had also been stronger. And he points out how Sazed, the vessel of Harmony, is growing more erratic. And the problem brewing with Harmony is going to make the current events taking place in the Lost Metal seem almost trivial by comparison. Now, that could actually be a good thing. One of the kind of central problems with Harmony is that he's been paralyzed by holding these two conflicting shards of ruin and preservation, and so finds it difficult to do anything. And so if ruin wins out, this growing imbalance may make it easier for Harmony to act. But it also means that he would become something closer to discord, which could be the new shard. And I have no idea what discord could wreak on the Cosmere. And one way or the other, a Harmony that turns into a discord, is no longer going to be reliable as this benevolent, thoughtful shard that we know as Sazed or Harmony. The fourth thing that I think we're going to see Scadrial face is the splintering of the various factions on the planet. And there are many fault lines on Scadrial that can only grow, I think, more pronounced as time kind of ticks on. For one, certainly, the fault line between Kelsier and Harmony, or maybe Discord in the future, is growing. In fact, in the epilogue of the Lost Metal, when they're talking to each other, Kelsier commits to protecting Scadrial, quote unquote, whatever it costs, and basically says to Harmony, or please don't tell me that I'm gonna have to protect Scadrial from you, which is a pretty ominous way to end that book, and may end up being what happens when Harmony turns into Discord. But there's other fault lines here as well. For one, I think Kelsier's own Ghostbloods, his own group of supporters, are splintering. and he doesn't have the control over his own members that I think he'd like to. Specifically on that, I think we need to, as readers, watch allll really carefully. He's one of the members of the Ghostbloods that we see in Mistborn, originally from Silverlight, and he's the brother of a character that we see on Roshar known as allll. And at the end of the Lost Metal, we see Kelsier only just barely control allll in going after Marasi after she rejects the Ghostbloods. In fact, at the end of Wind and Truth, Kelsier acknowledges his concerns about keeping the Ghostbloods together to Shallan. He does say, and specifically he references allll. He says, allll's brother, allll died in the Stormlight Archive. He says, allll's brother allll is more than likely to break away from me. And he says, I might have a little civil war on my hands. And that's exactly what I think we're starting to see play out in the Lost Metal, and that we'll see play out following the events of all of what we've seen today in the Stormlight Archive and Mistborn. The third major fault line here on Scadrial is between the inhabitants of the Elendel Basin and the southern Scadrians of the Malwish, which wasn't resolved by the end of the Lost Metal. And I think it's interesting, I thought it was really interesting that the Scadrians that we see on Canticle, and Canticle, by the way, is set in the future after Mistborn and Wind and Truth conclude, the Scadrians that we see on Canticle are speaking Malwish, i.e. they're not residents of the Elendel Basin. And I think that suggests that the forces that win out on Scadrial are the southern Scadrians, not the residents of the basin where the events of Mistborn have been centered. So this is a lot. I think there's no doubt in my mind, as we look at the kind of various trends playing out, Scadrial has a tumultuous time ahead. Its god is becoming more discordant. It has potentially like two of the most crafty and most powerful shards in the Cosmere working against it. It has multiple internal divisions that make it difficult for it to unite. And the biggest thing that it has working for him is a hope of technological superiority, which honestly could backfire. And it makes me really look forward to Mistborn Era 3 that I know is coming, because I feel like that could be a super fun little romp about how Scadrial kind of falls apart. And so I think it's like planned for a release. Mistborn Era 3 is planned for a release in like 3 years. So we have a long way to go. And I'm like really nervous about what we will see there. So I think, but one way or the other, I think it'll be a blast. So what do you think? Tell me what you think of these kind of various themes that are playing out that I think we can project into the future. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. I try to post as regular as I can on all things Cosmere. Thank you, everyone.